Hello, everyone. My name is Chandler Petrak. I want to help you know the Bible and encounter the God behind it. Welcome to another episode of The Holy Middle. I'm super excited because today I have on Allie Mendoza, and Allie has meant so much to me and my wife, Anna, as well. She has walked alongside us when we were students at ORU, and also even leading up to our marriage and beyond that. She helped us with premarital and so many other things. But I love our conversations. Our conversations are always interesting and pack a lot of heat. You're going to see that today. But I think it's really going to help a lot of people. And I'll talk about that why here in a second. But first off, Allie, welcome to the Holy Middle podcast. And would you mind introducing yourself for the people that don't know you that well?
Of course, Chandler, thank you for having me. It's truly such an honor. I've been listening, and to be a guest, I'm like, all right, I'm stepping up in the
Yeah.
world. No, it's great to be here. Like Chandler said, my name is Allie Mendoza. I live here in Tulsa, Oklahoma. I have been at ORU in some form or fashion since 2020, 2012. So that dates me right there. But my latest assignment at ORU has been the Senior Director of ORU Missions and Outreach. So very passionate about missions, about the global context that we're living in. And yeah, I've been married to Augustine. It'll be 10 years in May, which is wild. I'm not sure I'm old enough to have been married for 10 years, but here I am. And yeah, I feel like that's probably enough. They'll get to know me as we
Yeah.
go through these questions.
Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah. That's great. Okay, so I'll just say this to kind of introduce some of the things we're going to talk about, Allie. First off, for people that are listening, you may know Allie. For those of you that don't, I think it's important to know that every single time that I have had conversations with Allie, when I get the opportunity to, they are just so packed with truth. And one of the things I love being around people like Allie for this reason. It's that she is a truth seeker, but also a truth teller. And we live in a culture that is very hot take oriented, and it is what we would call clickbait. It's to get views and likes and get people's attention. And I get that. But I feel like every time I have a conversation with you, Allie, you know what you believe, but not just that, you know why you believe it. And I feel like when we have conversations, I love them so much, not because we agree about everything. I think there's definitely some things we disagree about, but you know why you believe it. And I think that this episode is so important, and for people that are going to watch this, because I find that especially with Gen Z and even people before us, there's a lot of people who believe what they believe and they know what they believe, but they can't tell you why. So it's basically just regurgitated from what they were told or what they heard growing up for a long time. And so I say all that to say, Allie, I feel like our conversations are so helpful because if people talk to you and they get you going, they'll quickly realize that you know why you believe what you believe. And oftentimes it seems provocative. And I think that as you are a truth seeker, as you're a truth teller, your voice is so valuable. And, I see you on stage preaching in different contexts and at different meetings and different things. And I think it's really helpful for people to hear not just what you believe, but why you believe. And so I'm excited for this episode because it goes directly in line with the vision of this podcast. So I don't think that there's much of a better voice than you to speak to this. Like, how do we become people that come into a holy middle? And I feel like that's where the Bible leads us to. And oftentimes the middle is not always the easiest. And Jesus said, when he told the truth, that offense would come. And oftentimes truth is offensive. And so all of that to say, and to transition to our first part, I see you in different spaces as a woman in ministry. And I see you preaching. I see you in meetings. I see you in all of these different spaces. And I think that it's interesting because sometimes those spaces, if I'm being honest, are male dominated. And by that, I mean that whether it's by presence, just outnumbered in general. I feel like as a woman, I see you in those spaces and you're either outnumbered. I don't know all the behind the scenes for where you are on a daily basis, but I feel like your voice does hold a lot of water. And I know that when I first met you, I was intimidated by you. I was intimidated to talk to you. And some people have that kind of same feeling about you. But I think when they talk to you, they realize that you have such a special voice as a woman in ministry and that you hold a lot of weight. And so my first question is this, Allie, and I would love you to speak to this as clearly as possible, and just really how you've come to understand and sift through these kinds of things. But the first question is there's this movement, and you can correct me on any of this if I'm wrong, please do. There's 4 waves of feminism. Now, to my understanding, feminism, originally, I think it was in the 1700s, around the Enlightenment period, was birthed because they were trying to address injustices and things that were done to women illy and that were not fair between men and women. And then there's the other side of that I would say is like a hyper complementarianism, which I guess you could call anti-feminism. And it seems like the pendulum swings. So this is multi-layered because on one side, it's like there's feminism, and then on the other side, the extreme would be like a hyper complementarianism, which is essentially the idea that men and women are not necessarily a hyper version of that would be that men and women are not equal, and there's things that a man can do that a woman cannot, whether that's biologically or it's multi-layered because sometimes that manifests in the church or in marriages. So all of that, my question is what does it actually look like for biblical empowerment of a woman in ministry? What does that mean? What are your thoughts on that? And could you speak to feminism and hypercomplementarianism in our culture? What are your thoughts?
$10 million question right off the bat. I feel like there's so much in there that we could talk about. So I've decided to first start by recommending a book because that is what I do. I am a reader.
Yes.
I believe if you are a leader, you have to be a reader, and people who are readers are typically leaders. They just kind of walk hand in hand. So I would recommend everyone to read a book called Equal by Katya Adams. She is incredible. She's actually a medical doctor who is now a pastor up in Boston. She is the head pastor of her church. Her husband works at the church, but she is the head pastor, which I absolutely love, and I feel like that tells you a lot about her. But she basically, this book addresses per chapter different hot topic, like scripture passages that are commonly debated and quoted and often misused among the church to like separate women from leadership roles. And so it's just a really unique read because if you're like, hey, like I have questions about how, this chapter in Ephesians addresses women in leadership, you can literally just flip right to that chapter and read about it and like read her commentary, and she's extremely educated. So anyway, I highly recommend that book to all people, particularly women in ministry and leadership or men who are struggling with this question. But to kind of go, a little bit deeper into all this again, like this is so multifaceted, like we could talk for hours about this. Boiled down to a basic level, I think that biblical empowerment really just looks like reading the scripture, contextualizing it to today's world while keeping in mind the meta narrative of why God created male and female in the first place. And that sounds so simple, and it obviously breaks down to a million different questions, a million different nuances. But we look at the scripture, we look at God creating the world, and in it is the answer of man was not enough alone. And so woman was created as, in this word helper. Again, we could go into the Hebrew. I don't feel like that's like the space to do that today. But it's so clearly written into scripture, like this relationship that we're supposed to have is to be equal. And I think something small that people get really hung up on, just even at the beginning as we're reading Genesis, is like, well, man was created first and woman was taken out of man. So therefore, women have to be subservient to man. But nowhere
Mm,
else do we look at the order of creation and say, like, well, the sun is better than the moon because the sun is created first, or animals are created before humankind and humans aren't above animals. Like the order of creation, in my opinion, does not dictate like this level of power. And so it's like even at the beginning, like we get so confused because, well, like, women taken out of man, et cetera, et cetera. And it's like, I don't think order of creation like matters at all. So, you can probably guess by even you just asking this question, I am very egalitarian. And egalitarian would, mean that I believe that men and women are fully created equal. And the reason, if I boil everything down to like, why am I egalitarian? It's because Jesus, what he did on the cross I'll just use my husband Augustine as an example. What Jesus did on the cross for Augustine as a man, he equally did for me. I will stand alone before God. My father will not represent me before Jesus. My husband will not represent me before Jesus. I alone will stand before Jesus, which means that I am a fully, completely, intricately made human being who is just as equal to a man. Otherwise, Jesus would have had to die for us differently, in my opinion, or we would have to face judgment differently. And so, if I am equal in eternity, why would I not be equal on earth? To my logical, rational brain, like that just doesn't make any sense. So, I'm getting off track. And again, there's so many things we could talk about, but it's like,
yeah.
I really just think biblical empowerment needs to be this re-examining of scripture, of peeling back, man, what has the church taught us in the last 200 years that really isn't healthy, that really isn't the way of Jesus? And looking at women the way God looks at us, which, in my opinion, is very much equal.
That's so good. So to clarify, would you say that, and maybe you could elaborate on egalitarian versus complementarianism, by equal? So you would say essentially that when we stand face to face before Christ, we're equal in the sense of Augustine will not represent your life. So he's not superior to you in that sense. So we're equal in that way. But I think, like the question of, I guess in culture where it's like there's different roles. Like, how does that bleed out into marriage, into ministry work? And I guess my question is do you feel like there's anything that a man can do that a woman can't, and vice versa, or shouldn't, if that makes sense?
Yeah, no, that's a great question. My clickbait answer is no. There's
Mm-hmm.
nothing that a man can do that a woman can't. Obviously,
Mm-hmm.
biologically, there are things women can do that men can't do. And I really can't think of many things that men can do. It's just like, obviously, it's like, yes, you could argue, okay, men are stronger, typically faster, typically taller, typically, okay, whatever. Those are biological differences. But when we think of social roles, there's nothing I believe that a man can do that a woman can't do. Women can be president, men can be president, women can be lawyers, men can be lawyers, men can be doctors, women can be doctors. Obviously, both genders can be parents. You could argue a father is different than a mother, but at the end of the day, like you're both parenting a child. So it's like, I personally, I can't think of anything that a man can do that a woman shouldn't or
Mm-hmm.
couldn't in my
Yeah.
Western context.
Yeah. So, so how can you tell if, let's just use a ministry context, for example. How can you tell if one of the extremes is present? I know this wasn't in our show notes, but I'm just curious. What is one of the ways that you personally can look at a church, be in it, or a ministry, or a place of any sort where there's male and female leadership and people present, and you can tell that one of the two is present, either feminism, like what does that look like if it's present, or the reverse of that, like a hyper complementarianism or an anti-feminism? How can you tell when one or the other is present, and how would you deal with that and address it?
Yeah, I think it's all in the titles. So if you go to a church and there is not a single woman who has the pastor title, they are probably complementarian. and you would probably see them as directors or as administrators, but they wouldn't have the word pastor in their title. On the opposite, on the flip side, a more egalitarian church, like you're going to find female pastors or reverend or deacon or whatever your denomination is, fill in the blank. But it is such a red flag for me when all I see is like kids director, youth director, women's ministry director, and there's no pastor. I'm like, yeah, for me that's not a church. I mean, I'm saying this very kind of off the cuff, but it's just like 99% of the time, like that would be a church I would not be able to serve in or go to because I believe so strongly in women being in pastoral roles.
Yeah. And how do you think the I guess the reverse of that would be true? Like, I guess it would be like the you spoke to like male dominant, like a male dominant place. Do you think that it's possible for the reverse to be true, where it's like it's I guess it would be feminism, where it's like the female presence is so strong that it's at the detriment of males. Do you think that's possible? Have you ever seen that before?
I think it's possible. To be honest, I'm not sure I've ever seen that before, just like
Yeah.
personally. I mean,
Yeah.
ministry is a male dominated place. I mean, typically in the rooms I'm in, I'm one of maybe two females. A lot of times I'm the only woman in the room. If there's three of us, I'm like, wow, we are crushing it. So, I mean, are there? Absolutely. I do think, especially in the missiological world and the missions world, that is a more typically female dominant space of ministry. But even then, I mean, I wouldn't say I've personally ever seen it to the detriment of males, but I'm sure
Okay.
there are.
Yeah. Yeah. So what do you feel like is the most damaging misunderstanding that Christians have as it pertains to women in ministry today?
Yeah, I think it's exactly this of the idea that women can't be pastors. Um, I don't see anywhere in scripture where that is taught, whether it's, past like head pastors, pastors, leaders in general. But I think to limit women as pastors, or say that they can't be in the pulpit, obviously not only excludes the women who are called to that and who have the gifting for that, but it also does such a disservice to the church at large. And not even just the women of the church, but also the men of the church. And I have a really big problem when men are like, man, well, I don't really receive from women in the pulpit. And I'm like, that's a hard issue that you need to deal with.
Yeah.
Like, but yeah, I do think that's one of the most, again, for the Western context, I'm not going to speak for, a lot of the world, but for the Western context, I think that is really, really damaging. And we're kind of seeing that thinking really like come back around, which I feel like is really disheartening.
Yeah. Yeah. That's so good. Yeah. So as I mentioned at the beginning on the onset of this episode, I feel like our conversations are so valuable when we get to have them, because I get to hear why you think what you think. And I don't know, maybe it's just me. I don't know if you can relate with this. I feel like when I have conversations with people about things, they tend to revert to their tribe or their box or their denominational affiliation, specifically when it's things that could be more controversial. But our conversations, I feel like, are so valuable because when we have them, there's no boxes. And I think that you're okay with not being in the boxes. And you actually, as you're seeking truth, I feel like you are okay with destroying those boxes, which I love so much. And I feel like it's so necessary. And really the vision behind why I feel like the Lord called me to do a lot of things that I do in ministry and this podcast as well is to help believers, Christians, come into a holy middle. And sometimes that means offending the people that you identify with the most or that you love the most, whether that's the denomination or maybe your family is a certain way or your friend group or what you would call your tribe. And so along those lines, I would love to hear, how does Allie Mendoza exercise that muscle of truth seeking and not only truth seeking, but truth telling. You're a very well thought out person, but you articulate well. And so when people talk to you, again, I don't think you mean to be provocative for provocative sake. But the truth does tend to be that way. So how do you do that? I mean, how do you cycle through these things and like flesh them out in scripture, in your life, and come to what you would say is truth?
Yeah. I I wrote down some thoughts on this because I did want to be very thoughtful with how I share this. So honestly, the first thing is getting out of the echo chamber. And most of us are in echo chambers thanks to the power of the algorithm, whether we totally realize that or not. But if we want to know what's actually going on in the world and discover like what we think about it, then we have to be intentional about reaching out beyond what we're comfortable hearing. And I think echo chambers are really enticing because they make us feel very validated. They typically make us feel very almost righteous in our beliefs of like, oh yeah, like all these other people on the internet, they think what I think. And, we're like, I understand where people are coming from. But we undervalue the sharpening and the growth that comes in our own minds and our own hearts when we do hear like dissonant voices. And so, I really strongly believe in reading news outlets and following reputable voices, not just any voice, obviously, because it's the internet. You can say whatever you want and no one's checking you, but it's like you need to be intentionally seeking out things that are different from your own opinion because they're not just going to pop up on your feed because that's not how the algorithm works. It's obviously specifically talking about social media here. But even just like the type of news that you read, hopefully you should be reading the news, and just intentionally getting out of that echo chamber that we are all trapped in, whether consciously or subconsciously. And number two goes right along with it is read widely or listen widely for those of you who are, more audio processors. I wish I was an audio processor. I am not. That's why I read so much. But you have to read or listen outside of your political views, your religious beliefs, whatever it is that you're wanting to learn about more and be, more educated on. It's like if you only read with people that you agree with, okay, you'll probably gain some knowledge, you'll probably gain some understanding, but again, it's like it's not until that you read the flip side of anything that your thinking is challenged. And so I just think there's so much value in reading, listening, watching people that you vehemently disagree with that are going to bring up a lot of anger and emotion. There's so many times I'm looking at my phone and I'm like, oh my gosh, like I can't believe someone's saying this. But it's so important because it's like, man, when I know what I think about what someone else is saying, then I really know what I think, if that makes sense. And so it's like you need that dissonance. If all we hear is just harmonious agreement, then we're living in a fantasy world. Like we need to understand true reality by listening to all sides. And then the third thing I just is think, think, think. I think sometimes Christians believe that thinking is like antithetical to faith or it's antithetical to emotion, where I believe that thinking is part of having faith. Thinking is this beautiful thing that the Lord has gifted us with, and thinking goes along with emotion. I feel like people, typically either lean toward logic and reasoning or, more emotion. I obviously tend towards logic, and so I have to work to bring that emotion into my life. But it's like thinking is so important. Well, I just have to say this. One of my favorite quotes from classic literature, okay, is Alice in Wonderland. It's a children's story by Lewis Carroll. It's amazing. If you don't know the story, it's topsy-turvy, it's hilarious, but Alice, the main character, is having a conversation with the Mad Hatter. And Alice says, I don't think, and then the Hatter interrupts her, and he says, then you shouldn't talk. And I quote that to myself and to others, mostly to Augustine, because he knows the inside jokes all the time. But I seriously think that's really good advice. Like, if you're not thinking, you probably shouldn't be talking about it. And there's a lot of people on the internet, in church, on platforms who are saying a lot of things without actually thinking about it first. And I can be guilty of this too, obviously. But it's like, man, like we have to actually sit down and think. We have to pull together logic and emotion and think about things holistically before we speak about them. So those are my three main things.
Yeah, that's so good. That's so, so good. There's so much we could say. There was a girl at a church one time when I was younger, and she was Pentecostal, and she told me that I should not listen and read things where the author or the authors do not speak in tongues. And she said, the reason is because how could I get anything from somebody who isn't spirit filled? And I feel like that kind of plays into what you're talking about, is how Christians think that thinking is antithetical to our faith, but it's not. And I think it really loosely, maybe directly ties into what is the greatest command, which is to love the Lord our God with all of our heart, soul, and strength, with our mind, right? And so I also heard one time that somebody said that, I forget who it was, but they said something along the lines of, I think it was in a book I read, they said that the hardest person to teach is not the person who doesn't know the information, it's the person who thinks that they already do. And I think that has been my experience so far, is like the people who do not learn things are the ones that think that they know everything. And it's harder to teach people and help them unlearn things than it is to teach them new information. And so that's so good, but I feel like that's a good segue. And I think we'll sit at this next segment for a second, just because of the nature of it. And this is actually an area of thinking that you actually made me launch into this journey over the last several months, maybe about a year. Because when I was 18 years old, and I think there was an election going on, but I didn't know you had to register to vote. And so I had to wait until I was 22 to actually vote.
Man,
and
the
so
public school system failed you on that one.
Yes, really bad. So I have no clue about politics. I grew up in a family where they said that there are three things that you should never talk about, and that's religion, politics, and money. And I feel like those are the things that we should talk about the most, in my opinion.
Yeah.
And so I didn't really think about these things like you were talking about until recently. And we were in a meeting together, and you talked about this a little bit. I think it was sometime around last year, and you gave a presentation on how we should, if we're going to become more based and more perceptive and more accurate in our understanding as we're trying to seek truth, you should have a myriad of different voices that you're listening to. And I can attest to that as well, because even as somebody that was wanting to grow in theology and grow in my knowledge of the word, I started listening to like 5-hour long debates, and it was me listening to the people that I disagreed with. And that actually helped me formulate what I believed. And so when I was having discussions with people where it was like, they believed the thing that I disagreed with, I actually did so much better in being able to hold up a conversation with them and think thoughtfully, and not just regurgitating the things that I've always learned and heard. So with that, I heard you talk about this, and I think it's so fascinating because I don't see this much. I wasn't doing it until I heard you teach on this in that meeting, but listening to different voices. So around the time that you talked about it, I think it was the election was coming up soon, and it was in the midst of a very hot political environment in America. And you were talking about how I think you'd said you followed different voices like Kamala Harris, Donald Trump, and everything in between. Mm-hmm. So I remember after that, I literally went and followed all of these different voices because it was the same principle that I was wanting with theology and knowing the word more. And so I remember after that talk thinking about these things, and I have a lot of questions in this area that I think is good for people to hear, because when it comes to this, there's so much confusion about Christians and politics, and where are we supposed to side? Like, how do we not get confined to boxes? And we can talk about that here in a moment. But my first question is this: should Christians be involved in politics? Like, should we not? Should there be some separation between the two? If so, how do we be involved in politics as Christians, but not essentially become the pawn of a political party?
Yeah. I think absolutely Christians should be involved in politics, and not just because we're Christians, but because I think it's fundamental human decency that we should care about our neighbors and our country. And you do that. I mean, obviously, politics is an avenue for doing that. And I know a lot of people, they don't care, they don't understand politics, and honestly, it's like I get that. Our systems are confusing. I think they're corrupt. It can be really difficult to care. We all have compassion fatigue. I think a lot of us know that term. And I'm not going to pretend to know a ton. Like, I work hard to stay informed about what's going on, but like it is really difficult. And I'm not naturally passionate about politics, although it will seem that statement will seem false here in a minute as I get very passionate. But like I really like I was never interested in politics, like, in high school, or I never did debate or anything like that. I was a theater kid, like I wanted to sit around and read books and like sing show tunes. But everything changed for me a couple of years ago when I was talking with an international student at ORU, and they told me that they didn't have the privilege to not care about American politics because American politics directly affected their life and their country. And I realized that, like, man, not caring about politics is not an option for me. I live in a global society, I work in a global context. Like, I have to be able to care, or I have to care. And so I think how we engage with politics, though, obviously is extremely important. And, I think a lot of what I said earlier, of it's getting out of your political party's echo chamber to actually seek and understand like the other sides of the coin is really important in how we engage. And also to like, just to say this is I do strongly believe in the separation of church and state. And not every Christian believes that. There's been a lot of things, even in Oklahoma, in the last 6 months, where, and I don't have to get into the nuance of all of that, but I do very strongly believe in the separation of church and state. So I don't just say Christians should be involved so that we, influence laws and things for, our Christian beliefs, which I think there can be some place for that. But in the same breath, I very much hold the tension of I believe in freedom of religion for all people. And I strongly believe in the separation of church and state. So now I'm, already on my rabbit trail. But I do think a lot of believers are political pawns a little bit of their party. How honest do you want me to be right now, Chandler? Am I like going for it?
Go for it, all the way.
I do think a lot of Christians have bought the idea that the Republican Party is the Christian party. I don't personally believe that or adhere to that. If I'm going to be really, really vulnerable and honest, I do think the current administration has very much weaponized Christianity for their own political gain, which I think is very scary. And I think a lot of the Western church does have this idea that the Republican Party is the Christian party. And so that scares me a little bit. I would consider myself to be moderate. There's things that I do think each party is doing well. There's things that I definitely agree with the Republican Party, but there's also things I definitely agree with more the Democratic Party. There's things that I vehemently disagree with the Republican Party and things that I vehemently disagree with the Democratic Party. I have voted both Republican and Democrat in presidential elections in my 32 years. So if we don't want to be pawns of a political party, then I think we really need to stop believing the lie that one party has all the answers and the other party is straight from hell, and start looking at things, just like this podcast says, like with a more balanced view.
Yeah, that's so good. So my next question, and I've talked to Augustine about this a little bit, but I think it would be good because I haven't talked to many people about a figure who has been blowing up recently all over social media. His name is Nick Fuentes. I don't know if you've heard of him or not. You may have seen some of his clips, but he's become very popular because similar to you, and I would agree with you, is that I don't think that the Christian party is the Republican Party, like especially now by far. But one of the things that I actually love about Nick Fuentes is that he's very critical of the MAGA movement specifically. And sometimes you don't even hear him criticizing the Democratic Party, which would be seen as the opposite of Republican,
Mm-hmm.
because he finds things in the conservative movement to be more towards the side of truth. But with that, there's definitely some vulgarness that comes with it. His style of communication tends to be very provocative, but also vulgar sometimes. But he would tell you that he's a Catholic and that he believes that Jesus is the answer for America. But, and I would love for you, maybe we can dialogue about this a little bit. He's so well studied when it comes to history and different things from what it seems. And he's a gifted communicator. But I do think that can be a dangerous trap because it would be easy for me to just believe everything that he says because of those two things. He's a great communicator. And it seems like he has he's very well studied when it comes to history, America, and so on and so forth. One of the things specifically that he talks about is that he feels like as America, his whole motto and tagline is America First. That's the name of his show. And I'd love for you to talk about that as well if you have thoughts. But one of the things that he talks about is how America has become worse politically and everything else at it as it's become less and less, as it's become more and more diverse. So he talks about his personal opinion is that white people are the people that founded America, Europeans, and it was founded on Christian principles. And as what politicians call the browning of America, as America has become more and more diverse, he believes that it's become worse. And so I have a lot of questions, and maybe we can just think through this because I don't have, like a landing point. But I do know that there's some of that that's like it conflicts with me theologically immediately.
Mm-hmm.
But do you ever feel like it's okay to say America first? And we'll talk about different things like immigration here in a moment. But what are your thoughts on that? I mean, from what you understand, the America First tagline, his examples that he gives is like places like Africa, different parts of Africa, Russia, China, Switzerland. I guess I'm not very well studied, but he would say that those countries are what they are because they have a certain demographic. It's like their tribe. So what are your thoughts on that? Do you feel like America First motto is ever okay? And if so, to what extent? But also, what are your thoughts on the second part of that is America, the browning of America? And is it 100% inaccurate and bad? What are your thoughts?
Yeah. Um, so many things. Okay,
Yeah.
the idea of America First, I to me that would never under any circumstances be acceptable whatsoever to say or to hold, especially as a Christian. We are told time and time again, over and over in the scripture, to consider others more important than ourselves, to love our neighbor as we love ourselves, to serve others. I don't see in the gospel anywhere the mentality of any justification that would say America first, to me that's just so the opposite of who we are supposed to be as believers. Like it I think my primary emotion is anger because that's just easy to jump to, but if I can get past the anger, like honestly, like it really is grief of like I don't understand why Christians would think that we who live truly in the most privileged part of the world. I saw a statistic recently, like your chances of being born in each continent, and I don't want to completely quote it, but like, because I don't have the actual number in my head, but your chances of being born in North America are like 3% of the world. And so it's like to be born here in and of itself is like you've won the lottery. But then to have this mentality that America is more important than every other country, every other tribe, every other nation, I just think is just absolutely horrible. And
Mm.
as someone who is decently well traveled as a 32-year-old, I've been to I actually think 32 nations. So, I've been to every country in the world, but it's like I've been around a little bit. I don't understand why we would think that we are the best or that we matter the most. Like
Mm.
I would never understand that.
Yeah.
And I don't think that would be the way of Jesus at all. Um, Regarding Nick, I honestly don't know him very well. He's not someone that I have really spent a lot of time listening to. I honestly, it sounds like I probably should just to be able to know what he's saying, and like, especially if like young people are listening a lot to him. But as someone who is, I mean, my husband is American, he is third generation American, but my husband is Hispanic. My husband is brown. My last name is
Hmm.
Mendoza now. Obviously, that is not my natural last name. And so, for someone to say like the quote unquote browning of America is the source of our problems, like, I mean, just statistically, and you can't prove this by data because even AI, like I actually tried to look it up earlier, like AI didn't have an answer for me, but I would say the majority of the atrocities that have been committed in the world, especially in the last several hundred years, have been propagated by white people.
Hmm.
So to say that diversity is the root cause of what is happening in our nation and what is happening around the world. I mean, I don't agree with that at all. And I also believe that diversity is a representation of the kingdom. When I am in heaven, we know that it is every tribe, every tongue, every nation. Um, and that is not going to be a white heaven. Like it's going to be so beautifully diverse. And like we want that. Like that is what the Lord has created. Jesus was not white. Like let's be real here. Sorry for everybody who's got like the white Jesus picture on their wall, like their grandparents, but Jesus wasn't white.
Yeah.
So now I'm getting passionate, obviously.
That's good.
But I mean, I think it's so it again, it angers me. Like that is my primary emotion, but then I do feel like that peels back to grief of just like we have so misunderstood um, each other is as human beings, and um, and yeah, I don't see
Mm.
Jesus anywhere in that ideology.
Hmm.
I think is the bottom
Yeah.
line.
Yeah. Yeah. That's so helpful. I think that um, it's very helpful what you said, and I've listened to um, I've tried to listen to, like you said, sometimes the things that people say, the immediate response is anger. So I've tried to exercise that muscle of like listening beyond what I feel, and specifically with that take about diversity not always being a good thing. Some of the arguments that I've heard, and I'd love to hear your thoughts on this, as to whether it's you think it holds or not, is like for other countries, like I worked with a girl in my role who was from Namibia, right? And I hear her tell stories, and she's not here to speak to it, so I'm not going to act like I know the history of her country. But they have a lot of things that they, um, I would say in a healthy way, pride themselves in. Like it's a part of culture, it's a part of who they are. Um, and so, do you feel like that's ever okay? Like for people that are trying to think through these issues, is it ever okay to say, this is our people, this is what we look like, but we're open to others? Like, so not necessarily saying America first, no people here but white people, but is it ever okay to say, well, the core of who we are was, in this example, white. So as we lose that, we become less of who we are. I mean, what are your thoughts on that? Because that's some of what is being conversed about in our culture, especially amongst Gen Z, with different voices coming forward. So, I mean, what are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, that's an interesting question. I'm not sure I have a fantastic answer for it. I feel like for me, I grew up in an all-white family. I'm from the Midwest. I wouldn't say we have a lot of culture, like to be honest. As I think across different parts of the world in places where culture is truly a way of life. It is passed down from generation to generation. Even, with the coworker that you're talking about, it's like there's culture means something so different in different parts and different areas of the world. I wouldn't say for me personally, again, growing up in the Midwest, that I had a lot of culture that I would be afraid of losing or wanting to preserve, if that makes sense. So I'm not really sure that I could even fully answer because, again, I don't feel like I have much of a culture to lose or to give
Hmm.
in that sense. And I also think that culture goes far beyond skin color as well. I don't think, again, my husband is Hispanic, and in his household, like they had certain traditions and customs. Some of them, yes, being from different parts of Mexico and Spain is where his family is from. But there's a lot of other influences as well. And so, just because you are of a certain skin tone doesn't necessarily mean that those are the only culturals that you're clinging to, especially as we live in such a global society. So again, I don't think I've really answered your question very well, but I'm not sure I have a great answer to it.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, I'm just thinking about like in scripture, from the little that I've looked at it, it seems like the people of Israel, God definitely speaks to, um, this has been weaponized a lot, but like borders and stuff. And I do think that borders to some degree are biblical. But there seems like there was this sense of assimilation. And by that, I mean that you learn the language of the people when you come. And I'm kind of just pressing this because I think it's good for people to be able to think through it. And there's so many people, even at where we work, where it's like they're talking about this. And so I just don't want people to be blindsided or just have like an answer that they've heard their whole life. And so with that, I mean, I'm trying to formulate my question. It's just a lot to think about. And I guess I'm thinking like, for somewhere like a part of Africa, and it's like this is the core of who they are is a certain skin color. I'm just thinking like, do we think that people immigrating to their place, maybe it's in a certain part of Africa, do we ever say that, oh, that's not a good thing? Or is diversity always a good thing? So these are the things that I'm just thinking about. I don't know if you had any more thoughts, and I know this is a conversation now in our especially amongst Gen Z, but yeah, just things that I'm thinking about, and we'll kind of come back to that here in a second because I have some rapid response stuff I want to ask you. But did you have any other thoughts before we?
No, let's dive into it.
Okay, great. Okay, so I would love to do some rapid fire, rapid response topics. And Allie, I would love for you to maybe in 30, 45 seconds, if you can, like give your response. And we can revisit some of these here in a second if you want to come back to them. Some of them we've kind of touched on, but like if you had 30 seconds with somebody and they made this statement to you and they asked, what do you think? I would love to hear your thoughts. Okay, so the first one is, and most of these are quotes that I've heard, and they kind of vary. Some are political, some are more broad. The first one is this: equal rights, equal fights. And essentially that's saying women can't do everything a man can do.
I would quote Dwight Schrute, false. No, I do believe that women can do everything that men can do, especially like I mentioned earlier regarding social roles. Obviously, there's physical differences. There's different, physical roles that a man and women fill. But beyond biology, then I believe there's nothing a man can do that a woman can't do.
Great. Immigration. We should deport all illegal immigrants and close our borders completely.
Absolutely not.
Mm.
I'm very passionate about immigration, and while I do believe in healthy borders, such as a woman who I really admire and respect, she leads a ministry called Woman of Welcome. Her name is Bree, but she talks a lot about deporting criminals and keeping contributors. And I think that that is really just a great, really succinct way of saying like, yes, we want secure borders. I don't believe in fully open borders, but also it's like we want to keep contributors to our country. There's so many immigrants who are bringing so much value to our nation. But even beyond that, I believe that loving our neighbor is a heart posture that we are commanded in scripture, like time and time and time again to have. Love the foreigner, care for the sojourner, protect the widow and the orphan. And I think that truly like immigration is so close to the heart of God. And so it has to be close to our heart because he's so clear about his commandments. So I could talk a lot about that, but that was my 30
Yeah.
seconds.
Yeah, maybe we can come back to that one. I'd love to hear more thoughts. Okay, the next one. We stand with Israel. They are the chosen people of God.
Oh, this one feels like clickbait. I believe that Israel is God's chosen people, but I don't think that standing with the current geographical nation of Israel or its current political regime is the same as supporting the covenant that God made with the Israelites. So I don't believe in blindly supporting Israel. I think that there needs to be a lot of conversation and thoughtfulness and prayer. And the nation of Israel is not immune to making mistakes, and yes, should be carefully considered.
That's
Yeah.
good. Next one. You can't be a Democrat and be a Christian.
I believe you can absolutely be a Democrat and a Christian, just like you can be a moderate and be a Christian, just like you can be a Republican and be a Christian. I believe political parties are just that. They are political parties. They do not determine our salvation or our marker of our salvation. So, yeah.
America is a Christian nation.
I do think America was founded upon Christian principles, but I would not classify us as a Christian nation anymore. And obviously, there's a lot there, but I just like very simply said, like, I think we have gone very far from where we have been, and so I wouldn't say we're a Christian nation. And like I mentioned earlier, it's like I do strongly believe in the separation of church and state as well.
Okay, the next one. Halloween is demonic. These last two I had to get out so that I could get it going.
We've talked a lot about this channel. I love it. No, I do not think Halloween is demonic. Can it be seen and used by people that way? Sure, absolutely. But the root of Halloween, in my little time of research, it's actually is called All Hallows Eve. Also, Samhain, that is another kind of the marking of the harvest, but it's actually a Christian remembrance day that reflects on one's morality and thinking about eternity. And there's 3 days of remembrance in a row. It's obviously All Hallows Eve on October 31st. Then it's All Saints Day on November 1st. And then All Souls Day on November 2nd. And so I do not believe that Halloween is demonic. I'm not a holiday girl, like at all, but I actually do really love Halloween. It's my favorite holiday, and I am not ashamed of that fact. I'm a theater
Yeah.
kid, so dressing up, absolutely.
Yeah.
That's my
Absolutely.
jam.
Yeah, love it. Okay, last one, and I know this one will hit right home for you. Short-term missions is pointless.
Well, I really hope it's not pointless. Otherwise, my job would be completely pointless. For those of you who don't know, I do send out global short-term missions trips and do a lot of local outreach. Like that is my entire role at ORU. So I truly believe that, hear me, healthy, strategic short-term missions, which is what we aim to do at ORU, is incredible. It changes hearts, minds, lives, communities, both in the people who go and the people who receive and the context on the ground. So I think short-term missions is a really beautiful exchange in the kingdom that takes place when it's done well. And I think it's just an extremely, extremely powerful way to experience the global church and to also serve the global church. So I am a big fan of healthy strategic short-term missions.
So good. Okay, so if there was like one or two, maybe there's none, that's okay. If there's like one or two, we talked about equal rights, equal fights, immigration, Israel, more about the Democratic Party and being a Christian. Is America a Christian nation? Halloween, short-term missions. Is there like one or two that you feel like we should elaborate on?
I mean, we can elaborate on immigration. I think that's always a great one
Okay.
to talk about. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that it would be great for people. I mean, and you mentioned this for a second, but maybe we can think through this too. In the little that I know from scripture about immigration specifically, um, and I'm still working through this, it seemed like Israel was it was a nation, it was a people, it was a set place. And as it pertains to borders, and what we would understand as borders, um, for people that were foreigners, God actually had very strict um, laws set in place to protect foreigners, but also to protect, like you said, criminals from coming inside. And so, and there seemed like there was this element of assimilation. So they would, if you were going to come into a nation as an immigrant, you would have to assimilate to that culture. The primary way being learning the language. So, what are your thoughts on immigration? I mean, we talked about it a little bit, but like, what does having yeah, maybe you can elaborate because I know you mentioned the border part and different things like that. What does that look like biblically? What are your thoughts?
Yeah, and again, I mean, there's so much to unpack here. So I'll give a resource first.
Hmm.
A ministry called Women of Welcome, I mentioned it briefly, is an incredible resource. They work in tandem with World Relief, which is also an amazing organization that serves, refugees and immigrants. But Women of Welcome does a great job of taking what is happening politically, what is happening at the borders, and really synthesizing things for the ordinary average day person like myself. They have free resources. They have free Bible studies. I recently did a Bible study with some girls at ORU, and literally the title of the Bible study was "What does the Bible say about immigration?" And it's just looking at immigration in Scripture. So I think that they are, again, whether you follow them on Instagram, you read Bree's book called Start with Welcome. I think just educating yourself about this issue is one of the most important things you can do because it's one of those topics that obviously there's a lot of hot buttons. People get really passionate about it, but there's also a lot of false information and a lot of, dare I say, like propaganda about it. And so for people
Mm.
to actually understand what is happening, I think you need to look beyond main news source channels and go a little bit deeper into trustworthy people, believers who are doing work on the ground and who actually are like this is their full-time job and really learning about it and coming in as a learner. Um, so yeah, that's just my plug for Women of Welcome. And
Hmm.
I've already kind of lost what direction we're going with it. I'm so sorry.
No, yeah, that's totally fine. I'm curious, and we can kind of wrap up the immigration thing here because I want to ask you about one other thing, one other
Sure.
topic. So basically, Allie, do you feel like it's ever okay to say no to an immigrant, to turn away an immigrant? And specifically with the Biden administration, to my understanding, there were, I think the number was around 10 million illegal immigrants that came into America. Um, with that in the background, I mean, what are your thoughts on that? Is it a good thing to deport all of the people that came in illegally? Like, where do we, as a Christian, how do we take a kingdom mindset with that? Do we deport them? Is it ever okay to say no to them?
Yeah, I think you're asking two different questions, which is good, but they're very different in the sense of it's a different process before someone is here, and then it's a different process after someone is here. And honestly, like our our laws, and people say this all the time, but it's like our immigration system is so complicated and so corrupt and so difficult that it's not an easy answer. It's not possible to say, well, someone came here illegally, so they should be deported when like seeking asylum, you have to be standing on US soil to seek asylum. You have to be here in order to do that. You can't do that in a virtual queue from halfway across the world. And so everything is so complicated and convoluted that I think asking black and white questions is actually really difficult because they're not black and white answers. So I'm not trying to cop out from answering these,
Yeah.
but it's such a complicated system and question that's like you really have to like get out the shovel and be willing to dig in order to have a in order to kind of know what you're getting into like with a specific avenue of immigration, because again there's so many different things going on as well, if that makes sense.
Yeah. Yeah. That's so good. Okay. So last section here, we're going over a little bit over an hour.
Sorry.
No, I love
Talking.
it. As you mentioned, you're a huge reader. You've recommended some books over time that I've checked out and they're just phenomenal. So I don't want to like give any that I think you would recommend. But if you could say outside of the Bible, what are the top 3 books that you would recommend for theology, leadership that have shaped your theology and leadership that you would recommend for people?
Yeah. So my books will probably surprise you a little bit. They're not really, well, one of them is a theology book, but my first one that I recommend is Les Miserables by Victor Hugo. It is one of the most beautiful books, in my opinion, just in all of literature, first of all, but also like it is a picture of the gospel. And I was just actually writing just kind of a reflection on this book. And just very, very quickly, if you read Les Mis, you will see yourself in every single character. And I think that is very unique amongst literature. And so I love Hugo. And even just, you compare Jean Valjean and Javert and Salvation and Damnation and all of these things. So I think Les Mis is like truly a picture of the gospel. And I absolutely love it. It's stunning. My second would be Man's Search for Meaning by Viktor Frankl. He is a survivor of the Holocaust. Obviously an extremely famous book, but it's deeply challenging. And I read a lot about World War II. It's obviously a fascinating period in history. And so reading his book, I've read it several times. It's just always incredibly challenging. The third would be Walking with God Through Pain and Suffering by Timothy Keller. My personal story, which obviously I'm not getting into today, but I've had chronic pain since I was 10 years old. So I've had chronic pain for 22 years and counting. And really all 3 of these books, Keller's book, obviously Viktor Frankl's book is about suffering. But even Les Mis, like there's such a theme of suffering and pain in the story. And I think that if you can answer the question truly for yourself of why does God allow pain in the world and why does God allow pain in my personal life, then I think you have a very strong foundation that is not easily shaken. And so all 3 of these books really kind of center on that theme of suffering, which I just think is really important.
That's so good. Is there a book that you feel like is overhyped by Christians, and then one that's seriously underrated?
I don't think overhyped. Books are so personal. I mean, obviously there's books that are a big buzzword. People talk all the time about Ruthless Elimination of Hurry by John Mark Comer, which is a fantastic book. Or, maybe not as much anymore, but something like when I was growing up, like Radical by David Platt, like everybody read Radical, things like that. But I just think books are so individual. It's like a book that maybe I love doesn't really hit for someone else and vice versa. And I think that's great. There are many underrated books. So I'm going to rapid fire 5 books because, this is me. Okay, first book would be Celebrities for Jesus by Caitlin Beatty. Talks about how platforms, like pastoral scandals, like how those are hurting the church. It's a fantastic read. She's very, very eloquent. I really like her a lot. Dealing with the Rejection and Praise of Man by Bob Sorge. An 80-page book that will leave you so convicted. You felt like it was just like hitting you in the gut every single time. It's fantastic. For all my introverts out there, Introverts in the Church by Adam McHugh. Very, very good. Love that book. My favorite Comer book would be Live No Lies. Ruthless is great, but Live No Lies, I think, just is absolutely incredible. And then again, just to plug one more time, would be Equal by Katya Adams because it is a game changer. So love that.
Awesome. Sweet. Okay. In closing, my original question was, if you had 30 to 60 seconds with Gen Z standing in front of you, what would you say to them? But I'll kind of create a hybrid of that. given our conversation today? And so you can answer both, but I'd love to hear your thoughts on the hybrid version of that, which is,
Sure.
Allie, if you were standing in front of Gen Z, I mean, you just had the opportunity to speak to all of Gen Z at one time, how would you talk to them? What would you tell them on how to become a more critical thinker, how to break out of the echo chambers and become a better truth seeker and truth?
Oh gosh, that's no pressure. I feel like, oh
Yeah.
my gosh, how am I supposed to do this? Um, mm,
Sorry to put you on the
Chandler,
spot there.
no, it's such a good question. It's such a good question. I think what I would mostly say is you have to remember that you live in a global context. You serve a global God, and we live in a global society. And there is a deep responsibility that comes with that that didn't exist, I think, 30 years ago, 50 years ago. It existed some when I was in high school and in college, but not to the effect that it is today. And so our responsibility, your responsibility as a believer, as a man or woman of God, it is profound. And it is so easy to want to check out and to have compassion fatigue and to not care and to let, everybody else have a voice and figure things out in the world. But, we will stand before the Lord and give an account for our life. And I think in an age where we're able to use our platform to say anything, yes, we're accountable for our words, but I think we're almost more accountable for what we didn't say sometimes. And it's easy to stay silent. It's easier to just post the fun things or to do the fun things. But we have to be able to speak up and to say the hard thing. And in order to say the hard thing, we have to think first. We can't be Alice. We can't say, I don't think. We have to think. We have to engage. We have to use our brain and our consecrated imagination that the Lord gave us. And that is a beautiful, holy, awesome responsibility. And do I do it perfectly every day? Absolutely not. But it's something that I do believe the Lord is calling this generation to, is not just to be, feelers and doers, but thinkers. And I think when we think well, then action is impacted, then lives are impacted, then the dominoes fall. But it's like we have to start here in our brain and think critically and think logically and think Christ-centered thoughts, and then things follow after that.
That's so
That's what
good.
I'd say.
Allie, I heard this story one time from a preacher, and I feel like it summarizes what you specifically have been to my life. It was a preacher who's very well known, and his daughter was writing a book, and she had poured years into this book, and she was writing it, and before she sent it to the publisher to have final edits to be published, she gave it to her dad, the preacher, and her dad was reading through it, and he read through it, and he looked up at her, and he said, "What is this? This is so bad." And she said that she started crying, and she was mad at him for weeks, and she didn't want to talk to him. But then she went back, she edited her book, gave it back to him, and he read through it again, and he said, "This is what you have inside of you. This is great." And she sent it off, and it became one of the best-selling books, New York Times bestseller. And so then she said to him, the preacher, her dad, she said that I was able to trust your praise because of your criticism. And I just wanted to say thank you, because I feel like your voice and this conversation, even, you've been willing to think through difficult issues, but also have the conversation. And I feel like our generation is starting to see that. And even this next year, I feel like people will see that in you. And I'm excited for people to hear some of the conversations that we all get to have behind the scenes. So, Allie, thank you so much for being on Holy Middle.
Thank you, Chandler. It was an honor. I appreciate you so much.
Yep. Well, thank you so much for tuning into another episode of The Holy Middle. I'm going to leave Allie's handle and how you can contact her and keep up to date with her in the description. If you're watching on YouTube, make sure you subscribe, leave a like, and a comment. What was your favorite part of the Holy Middle podcast today? What did you disagree with? If you're watching on Apple Podcasts or Spotify, make sure you leave a review. But until next time, thank you all so much for tuning in. And until next time, we'll see you later.